Hello everyone, Yeva here from simplyyeva.com, and in today's video I would like to share a few ways how you can assess your ESL students throughout the year, every day, every week. Because we are in a testing season here, it's February, and the standardized testing is something that we have to do. Sometimes it's easy to lose track of what our students are capable of doing. So I prepared a short presentation to go over some of the things that we have to keep in mind. And I think that you will already see that you are doing those things already. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here so that I can, let's see, do the presentation. And here we go. So how to track ESL student progress in listening, reading, speaking, and writing. So here are a few things that we will talk about today, and there are not many. Bloom's taxonomy, I'm pretty sure you've heard of it, but we will review and I will give you a few ideas of what it does for English learners. Types of assessment and everyday assessments for all language domains, listening, reading, speaking, and writing. So Bloom's taxonomy is something that we learn about at school. It's the way of how we can think, and the lowest levels, the lower level thinking skills are remembering, understanding, and we are going up to applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So our goal when we teach the students is to bring them up to the higher order thinking skills. Now, so when our ESL students are with us, remembering is one of the things, in another language, is one of the things that we work with a lot. If you asked a student to remember or to share some information about what they just read or heard in their first language, they would be able to quickly go up the ladder of Bloom's. But when you are starting to do it in another language, it takes a lot more time to remember, and you are stuck on those first two steps for quite a bit. So here's a way of putting it. So we must remember a concept before we can understand it. Okay, so I work with English learners in a mainstream classroom, and they are exposed to a lot of work that is required of native speakers. So in high school, for example, you are required to analyze and to evaluate things, but for ESL students, they cannot even understand the story if they can't remember what it's all about. So, and then we must understand a concept before we can apply it, apply before analyze, must have analyzed before we can evaluate, and then do all of those steps before we can create something. So remember, when you are, for example, I'm going to give you an example of, let's say you are in a language arts class and you have an English learner. In the high school, a lot of times you say, all right, let's compare, let's analyze what the causes and effects of certain events in history or of certain events in a story. For ESL students, it is super important to understand what the story is about in the first place. So a good way to do it is to, if you have an opportunity, is to provide first language support for them. This is not my creation, so I just wanted to share that it was from a blog More Than English, and here is the link to it, and I can actually link to it under the video for you. So here are examples. Remembering and understanding, the questions are who, what, when, where, and how, okay? Or, so who is the main character of the story? What does he or she do? When does the story take place? Where does the story take place? And then how is already making them move into a higher order a little bit, saying how do they get from point A to point B? Another way how students can demonstrate that they remember and understand the story is retelling the story in their own words. And here's where you can probably provide some sentence starters, especially for the beginners. Now, moving to the other end of the spectrum, synthesizing and evaluating would involve the students predicting creating new products. So if you read a story, what do you think will happen next? The students would be able, if they understand the story, they would be able to predict creating new products, anything from essays to presentations to scientific experiments and so on. Another way is to agree, disagree, and make decisions. Sometimes the students are required to participate in debates or Socratic seminars, and these are the opportunities for them to show their higher order thinking skills. So now that we covered or reviewed what Bloom's is and where ESL students are, what is assessment in general? We all know, but let's recap. We basically check in to see how the students are progressing. So which students are performing well and which ones are struggling? This is our assessment. So there are two types. The first one is informal and formative. These are the things that we do every single day, on-the-spot opportunities. Hey, can you recap in 3 sentences what we just talked about? Or another way is authentic assessment is something that is relevant to the student's real life. So if a student is not understanding a concept, bringing it to their life, giving an example that they can relate to would help you evaluate whether they grasp the concept. Informal and formative assessment can be done in multiple ways. You can ask them to perform based on skills or outcomes that you want. And you can also collect student work. That would be like portfolio type. And then there is summative and formal assessment. So I already talked that we are in the middle of formal assessment season where we have to give a state mandated test to track student progress. So these are your Common Core assessments. These are your Access for ELLs assessments and any other assessments that your state or country deems necessary. These kind of assessments, the formal ones, allow the teachers to track progress of the entire school or of the, let's say, ESL population. And they usually follow academic trends. So every few years, something comes up that is more focus is placed, for example, nowadays is on collaboration and information. So these tests basically look how students can deal with this information. So informal assessment, I already mentioned it. Here are a few of my favorites. So to check in for a class, who can tell me who is the main character, for example? An exit ticket, which can be done in the form of a written exit ticket, or it can be basically tell me one thing that you learned and one thing that you are struggling with today. Self-evaluation versus teacher evaluation give students opportunities to reflect on their own learning and then compare with what your perception of their learning is. This really is a very powerful tool that allows you to make connection with the student and to provide real feedback and allows them to see where they're at. You can use videos. You can record a video and encourage students to record also. You can use rubrics for writing and speaking as well as interviews. So these are the few things that you can do for informal assessment. And now we're going to go in the 4 language domains. So for listening assessment, dictation is a great tool. A lot of times we think that we know what the students know, but if you try to dictate a few sentences, we realize that sometimes they don't. Maybe they mishear some words. Maybe they mishear some concepts. Maybe words like supposed to, for example, are often spelled posed to. Just a quick example. To assess listening, you can also use cloze exercises where you omit certain words, let's say if you're studying vocabulary, or certain grammatical structures, or anything that you really want this to assess the students on, and they have to fill the exercise by listening to what you're saying. Games are great types of assessment. Total physical response, when the students have to mimic what you're saying or what you're doing, or perform a task that you tell them to do, and you can see if they heard you right. Bingo is great for any type of assessment, for listening, reading, almost speaking, and so on. Minimal pairs would be the sounds that are similar, that are produced in a similar place in your mouth. You would say d, t, for example. What do you hear? Or b, p. You can use tongue twisters. You can do the game slap the word, where the students run to the board and slap the word that they hear that you're saying. And for higher level students, I already mentioned, would be a debate. So you have this type of listening is already moving up the Bloom's ladder and requires you to listen not for exactly the grammatical structures, but for what the other person is saying. Reading assessment is done across the curriculum, and these are the things that you can do with your students independently, depending on what your goals are. So journaling, reading response notebooks. So let's say you read, the students read either independently, depending on their level, or you read something as a class if you have a lower level, and then they can respond in their notebooks to the reading. It does not have to be an elaborate one-page stream of consciousness. Students can meet you at their level. They can write one sentence, they can write a list, but this would allow you to understand what they understand. Students can draw pictures representing the story. Students can act it out. You can also, for higher level students, higher level proficiency students, you do open book assessments, interviews, and active reading and thinking, because these are a little bit more language involved. So when you have open book assessments, that means that the student must have read and must have understood and is ready to take the next step. So moving on to speaking assessment. In speaking and writing are productive skills, so they share a lot of similar assessments, so we use rubrics for both, but for speaking especially, you can make the rubrics specific to the language structure that you are teaching. You can have a rubric for pronunciation. I know a lot of English learners struggle with the sound TH, for example, the, th, and you can see if you can create a rubric that would provide some information on what the students need to work on. Vocabulary, let's say, does the student, let's say you learned, you taught vocabulary at the beginning of the week, and then you are asking the students to present or to speak a little bit about a certain topic, and they must use, let's say, at least three of the new vocabulary words. So that would be your rubric of assessing speaking. Or you can do the same for any grammar structure. So let's say the student correctly uses simple past tense. Now, there are other things that you can do for speaking. So for example, again, interview comes up because speaking is a communicative, so interview with a partner. This actually can involve all domains. So if a partner is, one partner is speaking, the other one is listening, and then they may write down and then report out. So there are many opportunities for you to assess the language and potential misconceptions with an interview. We can use group discussions. The students can create a skit to show, to demonstrate a skill or to demonstrate understanding of what they had prepared before. Students can do a presentation, and one of my favorites is creating a video, and recently I've started using flipgrid.com. So it depends on the age group. A lot of people are self-conscious when it comes to creating a video, so there might be a little bit of this apprehension in the beginning, because let's face it, not all of us like our voices. We look at ourselves in the video and then we, start criticizing ourselves. But if we make it a light activity, and if we you present it in a way that there's no judgment and that the students, it's for the students' benefit, however you want to put it. They do warm to it, and then they are able to work through it. The best part about video is that they don't have to speak on the spot, because in Flipgrid you can put like little sticky notes, virtual sticky notes, so that you are basically reading what you're going to say. So there are different tools, and I highly recommend that you try this for your speaking assessment. And finally, we are in writing. So writing, it is very subjective to assess, if you ask me. This is my honest opinion. So to me, when you have a rubric that kind of like tames the writing, then it helps both you and the student. Because how many times when I was in school, I never really knew what my writing was measured by, like maybe by knowledge of like literary analysis or something like that, but we never had rubrics. And thank goodness I loved to write, and thank goodness I loved to read. So writing and literary analysis was my thing. But for those who had a hard time putting words onto paper, this was a struggle, because you really don't know what you're graded on. So when you have a writing assignment, let's say for English learners, teach the skill explicitly and, give very clear instructions on what you want the students to write. So let's say you're working on a grammatical structure for the sake of ease. I would go back to the same past simple. So let's say you're working on past simple and you're also working on complex sentences. So you want the students, or the sequence. So you want the students to use past simple, correct sequence, and complex sentences. And then, you give the topic, and the students at least have something to fall back on. Again, I'm not entirely sure whether I'm fully supportive of rubrics, but at least they give some sort of baseline for both the students and the teachers. So, and again, inform the students what you want them to show you ahead of time. And finally, one of the other things that would be very nice to do is portfolios of student work. It sounds like a lot of work, but if you think about it, if you give a task, let's say at the beginning of the year, they do like a personal narrative, and then they do different types of writing. And so you can collect the best work of the student, and you can keep it in a actual physical portfolio or a digital portfolio. And this allows you to see the student progress throughout the year, and it allows the student to see the progress throughout the year. It's very similar, in my opinion, to student self-evaluation and a teacher evaluation, because when you think you're not doing well and then you look at the work that you have produced, it gives you a lot of boost and confidence in how far you've actually come. So here's another rubric that I found on Teachers Pay Teachers, and this is based on the WIDA consortium. My state uses WIDA for screening English learners and for doing the annual access for ELLs, and they also have can-do descriptors, which allow us to see where the students are at and what we can expect from them in any language proficiency level. So like entering, emerging, developing, expanding, and all the way through reaching. And it allows like what is the linguistic complexity. For example, at level 1, you could probably see single words, phrases, chunks of simple language, and highest frequency vocabulary. And you may not be able to understand them at all times, but this is where the listening, speaking, and clarifying comes in. So this was a really helpful one. I found it on Teachers Pay Teachers, and quite honestly, I am not entirely sure of where, because I tried to look and link. So if you go on Teachers Pay Teachers, you should be able to narrow down your search for this. So here are some resources that I mentioned. Again, rubrics, you can go to Teachers Pay Teachers, like I mentioned, or you can make your own at rubistar.com. Flipgrid for video, you go to flipgrid.com, and they also have a tutorial. So, you know, I'm not very high tech, so I like to watch my tutorials if you need to. That's one of the things that I highly recommend. For self-assessment, I have a couple of exit tickets for all age groups, and also a self-assessment sheet for beginner students in higher grades. And if you go into my ESL resource library, you will find not only that, but other worksheets as well and other helpful tools for you to teach. So please sign up, and I will link it underneath the video. And one other thing that I highly recommend is Authentic Assessment for English Language Learners is a book that you can get on Amazon, and I will link to it underneath the video as well. It provides really, really practical tools for teachers to help English learners both in an ESL classroom and in a mainstream classroom. So, 2 things before you go. Thing 1, sign up for my free ESL resource library for assessment ideas. And for any other ideas. I have a ton of resources there. The link will be under the video again. And I said 3 things, but this is probably 2. So I do offer coaching sessions for teachers who find themselves overwhelmed with everything they have to do, or who are new to teaching ESL. And so I would like to offer you a free 30-minute Beat the ESL Teaching Overwhelm coaching session, in which we will uncover what is holding you back and we'll find some actionable steps that you can take right away, and you will leave the session feeling rejuvenated and confident again. I will link it underneath this video again, and if you feel called so, I would gladly help you. So, and that is it. So thank you for watching. It takes me a little bit to clear up my screen. Thank you very much for watching. Again, sign up for my ESL resource library. And if you feel that you need to get some support, whether it's emotional or professional, I am here, and I would gladly provide the coaching for you. I will link to it again. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Shoot me a message. Find me on social media. And thank you for watching. And until next time.